Greetings on behalf of Bishop Kevin Strickland and the Southeastern Synod staff. I'm Pastor Michael Jannett, Assistant to the Bishop for Formation and Communication. The sermon is for Sunday, July 25th, 2021, 10th Sunday after Pentecost. The Holy Gospel according to John. Chapter 6. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain, sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Well, Philip answered, 6 months' wages would not buy enough food for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But Jesus said to them, "I am. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of the Lord. People are hungry for justice, for peace, and some people are just outright physically hungry, like for food. Recently, folks have been debating the usefulness of commercial spaceflight, more specifically, the large amount of dollars needed to make commercial spaceflight possible when we have people on this very planet that are dying from hunger every day. Some statistics show that every year, 9 million people die from hunger across the globe. That's about 25,000 people per day. Yes, due to hunger and hunger-related illnesses or causes, 25,000 people die per day on this planet. Now, can commercial space flight bring about innovations to help solve world hunger? I sure hope so. But in the meantime, 25,000 people die of hunger every day. Hunger leads to malnutrition, leads to chronic illness, leads to death. People are hungry. Will you feed them? Or maybe you're the one listening in need of food this day. We seek sustenance. Those who are hungry seek sustenance. Those 25,000 who die seek sustenance. And the thing is, the world already produces enough should we decide to share it. Now, this isn't about 5,000 people sharing bread and fish to the point where they all had enough. Just imagine, though, being in the crowd. And it's a little cramped at first, a little bit confused. Not everybody can hear what's being said. But all of a sudden, bread and fish are being passed around. There's plenty of grass around to sit down. So you're told, don't bump into each other. Let's wait for Jesus to come around and bring this food. You weren't sure how it was going to work out, and neither did the disciples, we come to find out. I mean, it's rumored that Philip said not even 6 months' wages would be enough to feed the crowd. But you were patient. You got what you needed. The hunger pains have subsided. Now what? What did you just witness? A sign. That's what. Jesus has healed some people already at this point in John's gospel. And what happened that day was a sign. And now, this thing that has never happened has just happened. Well, at least not since the time of Elijah or Elisha. Maybe Jesus is a prophet. Can it really be true? This Jesus who feeds a crowd with next to nothing. Not just loaves, but barley loaves, the bread of the poor. The crowd experienced abundance, and now trust begins to form. This Jesus is maybe the real deal. So we should take him and make him our king. Not so fast. Right? Jesus slips out the back door, or slips out the side. And then it moves into this story of Jesus being with the disciples in the most strange of appearances. So again, Jesus has healed some people. He's now fed this large crowd of 5,000 plus. And now you're out on a boat with the other disciples, and things are getting dicey. The wind is blowing. The waves are starting to form in this lake. And so what do? Well, you probably tend to freak out. It's kind of scary. And then, lo and behold, there's something on the water. They recognize it finally as Jesus, and he's walking on the water toward them. Now, up to this point, no one has ever calmed a storm. No one has ever walked on water. I mean, even Jesus hasn't done that until he just did. Now what? Are you seeing the signs? Jesus is letting himself be known, the Christ, but not captured for the purposes of the crowds or even the disciples. Instead, once more, Jesus slips away as soon as the disciples are safe on the shore at Capernaum, kind of a miracle in and of itself. Jesus slips away just when the folks think that they have Jesus all figured out. Right? Now they can't capture Jesus for their own purpose. Whatever the disciples had cooking up or whatever plan the crowd had to make him a king, Jesus escapes that. So he's not there for their purposes anymore, but they can start to trust him. He's fed the hungry. He's led the disciples to safety. He walked on water. Maybe they can start having faith in Jesus. You and I have experienced some difficult times these last 2 years. And yes, some of you listening are just physically hungry. Maybe it's people who live in your neighborhood. Maybe you've lost a loved one recently. Maybe you're still battling with this COVID virus. And maybe you're just sitting there well and cared for. Maybe you're alone. Whatever that burden is that is weighing you down, Jesus is there with you. Jesus is finding a way to meet you where you are and bring people around you to support you, to love you, to work with you, to sit with you, to laugh with you, to cry with you, to mourn with you, and maybe to surprise you with grace and mercy. Jesus brings about trust in those who have heard his words and saw his deeds, these signs. And those who passed on those stories to the next generation believed in Jesus. We heard those stories of Jesus and his signs from our ancestors in the faith, maybe on felt boards or on DVDs or on your phones. And as we hear the stories of Jesus, read the words of Jesus, maybe we begin to believe, even though we still doubt and fear. And now we, who are filled with Christ's love, who are fed, who are prepared to serve, maybe we can trust Jesus and we can take Jesus' love and make it real in the world. Our actions are spurred on by the grace and mercy of Jesus, who feeds a hungry crowd, who calms the fears of his disciples. So bellies filled and fears calmed, we go out into the world to love and serve all people. Jesus equips us with what we need. Jesus empowers us with the gospel. Jesus calls us, engages us to action in the world. 25,000 people die every day due to hunger and hunger-related illnesses and conditions. You and I can do something about that. And maybe you already are serving in the community kitchen. Maybe there's a raised bed garden somewhere near you where folks can come and share in the food that is grown. Maybe you can do like in Spiritus and help create raised bed gardens where folks can then grow their own food. Or maybe you can gather canned goods and redistribute, or gather funds to donate to local food pantries. The ways to help are limitless. Physical hunger affects so many. And being free to serve our neighbor, we are now equipped and empowered to take action. When I lived in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, I saw the gospel in many ways, including through a community of people who helped refugees who had settled in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There's a grassroots organization that sprung up and called itself Roots for Refugees. A person in the community saw some refugees in the grocery store struggling one day, and that led to a community-wide effort to support these folks who have been placed in our city and sort of, given some instruction, but for the most part, kind of left to their own devices. And so this organization formed, and we started to gather lots of people around this effort. Folks from all across the religious spectrum: Christians, atheists, Baha'i people, people of the Muslim faith, and more. These concerned citizens in the community, out of the goodness of their own hearts, out of love for humanity, fed these refugees, taught them English, taught them how to shop in a grocery store. There was one particular family who had never seen oranges before. They lived their life as young people in a refugee camp. They got the opportunity to move to the United States and to Murfreesboro. And one of these members of the Roots for Refugees group brought a bag of oranges, showed them how to peel them and eat them. And then a few days later, they were brought some lemons. And these people thought they're just like oranges, tore into the lemons and started eating, only to realize not quite the same thing. Things that you and I might take for granted, they needed to learn. And so through the refugee program, these folks were given education, a chance at a new life, because they were ripped away from their community, from their traditions, from their culture, and had to learn how to live within our culture. They'd grown up with war and violence in their home countries. Now I pray that they're able to reclaim their culture, maintain their dignity as people from their communities. But we needed to get the basics. Through the witness of that community that formed around these refugees and volunteers, I was inspired. So were many others. That is the gospel in action. That is Jesus feeding the 5,000. That is Jesus telling people to fear not. As followers of Christ, we take Jesus' hand Jesus meets us in our deepest need. Then we go and tell the story, or better yet, we live as if we are fed and strengthened by God's grace. Can you see Jesus sitting next to you, maybe shifting in his seat, leaning closer to you? Now, can you hear Jesus asking you, how in the world are we going to feed all these people? And maybe your response could be, with your help, Jesus, with your help, we will fill their bellies and calm their fears, but only with your help. So come, be fed, and then go and feed others. Be present for at least one of those 25,000 who die every day. Be an inspiration for others, equipped by God's grace and mercy for the sake of the other. Amen.